Okay, everyone, we're waiting for just a few more people to join us and then we'll get started. I see everyone coming online now. Bear with us for just a few seconds as the system loads up. Okay, I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar. It is 1 o'clock Central, and we are going to be discussing how much does a lost customer really cost and sharing 3 customer retention strategies that fuel revenue growth. I'm Laura Michaels, and I'm the Managing Editor of Franchise Times, and I am excited to be joined today by John Schroeder of Nove Foresight and Angela Bassi with Listen 360. As the managing principal at Nove Foresight, John helps a wide range of companies and franchise organizations accelerate growth through their actionable insights, research, and big data, helping clients, including the Mosquito Authority, Wendy's, and Gillette, increase customer retention for long-term financial success. So we're excited to have John here with us today. And Angela is founder and president of Listen 360, which is a feedback and reviews platform for franchise organizations. Angela has built a successful company by listening to and meeting the expectations of her customers, and we're pleased to have her here with us today to share her real-world experience about the value of a loyal customer base. And so I hope everyone takes advantage of having these 2 great speakers here with us today by submitting questions throughout the webinar. You can look in your panel bar, in your menu bar for the questions panel and submit your questions that way. And we'll run through those during a Q&A portion toward the end of the webinar. And so with that, I will turn it over to John to get things started.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Laura. Really appreciate it. And everybody, welcome. Let's jump right in. Let's do a quick overview. So we're going to start out talking about 3 things today. First, we're going to talk about the benefits of customer retention. So what exactly is the business case around customer retention? And why should you focus your efforts on retention when you have so many other business priorities? And secondly, we'll talk about a retention checklist. So what are some of the immediate steps you can take to improve your retention that pay back right now? So we'll outline a range of steps everyone on this webinar can implement. And beyond immediate steps, what else can you do to grow your retention that'll have an even more profound impact on your business over time? And then third, bringing value to your business. So improving retention makes your business healthier. And when people become healthier, there's not really just one benefit, it's a whole host of things. People lose weight, they're less susceptible to disease, and retention is exactly the same thing for your business. So what we'll do is show you how all these other benefits, what you're going to get and when you focus on retention. So let's start with the business case for retention. So why should you focus on retention in the first place? Well, let's see what you all think. So what we're going to do here is to do a quick poll. And in this poll, we're going to ask you 2 questions, one at a time. First, and Adam, go ahead and load that up. We're going to ask you, do you believe retention is really critical to your profitability? And you can see the question right here. All you have to do is select one of those 2, the yes or the no, and press submit. So is retention critical to your profitability? So just to give you a sense as you're going ahead and doing that, I took a look at the attendee list, and we're really represented by a broad range of businesses. So we have folks in fitness, we've got folks in food and finance, education, real estate, we've got people in professional service and personal care. So take a second to let us know what you think. All right, so I think we're going to find the results right here. Oh my goodness. All right, we've got a clean sweep here. So 100%, 100% feel that retention is critical to your profitability. And that's great. You've come to the right webinar, absolutely. And really, it's very consistent with what we've heard from others that we've spoken with. In my view, retention is really marketing in disguise, and it's absolutely a key driver of profitability. So you can see here, we've got poll number 2 up. So think about this. Are you satisfied with your customer retention rate? Again, this is a real simple yes/no answer. So same drill, just press one of the two and hit submit. And I recognize that you might not know your actual retention rate, and that's fine. So just answer how you feel about the customer retention in your organization in general. And we'll see what you said. So 14% of you are satisfied, so that is fantastic. But the vast majority aren't. And that's also great, because what that means is that there's room for you to improve on one of the single most important drivers of your organization's success. 100% agree retention is critical. A small fraction are satisfied. And retention always reminds me as an initiative, sort of like eating vegetables is, for your health. And it's something we all know we should do, but I don't know about you, but I just don't get around to doing it. And so, like that, it's always, for an idea like that, it's always great to take a look and see if it's really worthwhile. All right, advancing the slide here. So let me just go back one. In cases like this, in my view, it's always worthwhile to kind of think, what exactly is the business case that says I should go ahead and do this strategy? Is there results that drive the actions? And so let's take a look at this. We're going to look at a few case studies here. And I'm going to start out with data from a yard service. So just to give you a little bit of background, this is a seasonal market, and its revenues are very heavily driven off of repeat clients. So we gathered data across their entire franchise group and then sorted them into 3 buckets: the top bucket, the middle, and the bottom. And those were all based on their retention rates. So let's take a second and look at the top. So what we see is that the retention rate for these guys is 85%, which means that 1 year from today, for every 100 of today's customers, you're going to have 85 in a year. That's actually a very good number. You could also look at it and say, well, they're going to lose 15% of their customers. So 85% retained or 15% lost is really the same thing. So now take a moment to think, what would you think the retention would be in the bottom third of these franchises? And in case you're wondering, these are all active franchises. They had to hit a certain minimum revenue threshold to be included. So what do you think? Well, what we saw for the folks in the bottom is that instead of retaining 85%, they only retained 70%. Or another way to look at that is they're losing 30% versus 15%, and that's twice the number lost. So what does this all mean financially to that organization? Well, the difference in the margin turns out to be a full 20%, and that is a direct and a large impact on their profitability. So we talked about business cases for retention. This is business case proof point number 1, that retention is a key driver of profitability. But that's about profitability today. What about in the long term? So here we're going to look at this in a slightly different way. And we calculated the lifetime value of the customer and tried to figure out how that differed between the top and the bottom third of franchises. Again, these are sorted by their retention rate. So to determine lifetime value, what you need to do is estimate how many customers will return each year, and then multiply that by their expected revenues, and then discount all of this for the time value of money. So let's say for the folks in this top third, you start with 100 customers today. In a year, in 2019, you'll have 85. In 2020, you'll have 72, because each year you lose 85%, or you lose 15%. In the bottom third, though, that's really different, because next year in 2019, you're going to only have 70. And then in 2020, you'll only have 72. So that's, not 72, pardon me, 50. And that's versus the 72 that you would have in the top. So the numbers are tremendously different. So here, when you're thinking about what the difference would be between the top and the bottom third of retention, think about what the relative size of those bars would be. So just take a moment and think what you might expect. So what we see, the actual difference in this case, it's a full factor of 2. So what that's saying is the lifetime value of customers in the top third of franchise is fully twice the lifetime value in the bottom, twice the value. And this is business case proof point number 2. Retention has a tremendous impact on your customer's lifetime value, which translates into the market value of your business. But Beyond that, you might argue that it's even more important in another way. So retention directly impacts your business's odds of survival. So we've seen all sorts of statistics that show that most businesses are going to fail within 5 years. So how does this vary by retention rates? Well, we asked the Nielsen Company, who has the world's largest database of new product launches, and they provided us this data. And what they wanted to see was that of all the products they tested, how many were still around 2 years after launch? And to be clear, this is consumer products, but the dynamics are very similar to any business that's heavily dependent on repeat customers. So they separated this into 5 buckets based on how satisfied customers were after they had the opportunity to use the product. So what they found, and you can see in that bar to the left, that's saying for a product where people have used it and said, no, I really don't like it. These guys are in the bottom 5th of all products they've tested. Almost none of those products survive. The more satisfied people are with a product, the more likely they are to come back, and the more likely they are to survive. So to bring this back to franchises, the reason that retention is so important is that when consumers just aren't satisfied, the business is almost certainly going to fail. So that's business case number 3. Retention helps you beat the very heavy odds of business survival. So knowing all this, let's look at 2 businesses. We're going to look at Blue Apron and SoulCycle. So Blue Apron, just for background, and you may know this, but it delivers easy-to-cook meal kits, and they were seen, or at least once seen, as a darling on Wall Street. SoulCycle, on the other hand, is a premium-priced spinning studio. And so they focus on atmosphere and customer experience, and they do things like have candles lit during the class. So you can see here on this chart that the retention rate for Blue Apron is, according to one source, 15%. So knowing what you know about lifetime value, what would you say the odds of that business's success are? So conversely, SoulCycle reportedly has a retention rate of 85%. So we looked into these a little bit, and I can tell you that SoulCycle, although they're not public, they list their growth rate at about 30% year over year for the last 5 years. Blue Apron did an IPO last June. Again, this is very, very hyped. I'm sure you've heard of that. It was set for $10. I looked this morning online, and their last trade yesterday was $2.10. So they've declined by a factor of 5 since their IPO. And there's no doubt, there's many other factors that are impacting these results. But in my view, the glaring difference in retention is probably the fundamental cause. So far here, what we've talked about is how better retention lets you keep more customers. But we haven't mentioned at all that stronger retention helps you gain new customers. So let me explain. Here's data from that same case study we showed earlier, showing the bottom, the middle, and the top performing franchises, again, sorted by their retention rate. But this time, instead of retention, we've plotted referrals. So to make this a little clearer, what we've done is index the referral rate for the top, middle, and the bottom against the bottom, so that the bars for the middle and the top represent the percentage increase in referrals that they receive. So if you take a look at this, the top performing franchises are going to receive nearly 20% more referrals than the bottom performing ones. Many studies, our own data, and I'm sure your experience will show that referrals are the single most effective source of new customers. So people believe their friends more than they believe digital ads. So why would a franchise that retains more customers also receive more referrals? Well, the answer is that because all the things that they do to make the customer experience better, whether it's professionalism or timeliness or quality or whatever, all of those things cause the customers to be more excited. And the more excited customers are, the more referrals they're going to make. So this is our final business case, that strong retention also drives the revenue side of your franchise. So what we've done is to lay out the business case for retention. Now what we'd like to do is give you the tools to make some immediate progress. So here we're going to take you through a few checklists that, if followed, are almost certain to have a major impact on your retention rate. And there's 4 things we're going to look at. We're going to look at measuring customer feedback, measuring customer retention, creating a customer feedback loop, and thinking both tactically and strategically. So for the first item, which is measuring customer feedback, you'll hear from Angela Bossi, who founded Listen 360 to accomplish exactly that goal. Angela?
Yeah, thanks, John. So the first thing you'll need as you begin to focus on retention is a system for gathering and analyzing your customer feedback. And that's really because you can't manage what you don't know about. My buttons aren't, okay, here we go. So the method that we recommend at Listen 360 is Net Promoter. And Net Promoter is a multifaceted program to increase company growth through focused enhancement of customer loyalty. And that's a mouthful. But what it really means is that it's an actual strategy for growing your business by delighting your customers. So the first facet is the philosophy. Delight your customers and you're going to grow organically. And so this is really motherhood and apple pie. It's what you learned at Sunday school, sort of do unto others. But what we'll learn in a few moments is that these philosophical ideas also have strong financial underpinning as well. Guys, I'm having a hard time advancing the slides. Could somebody help a sister out here? Okay, perfect. So Net Promoter was developed over the course of a decade by a group of independent consultants called Bain & Company. And these guys set out to understand rapidly growing businesses. And they wanted to understand why some companies were able to grow at 3 to 4 times the rate of their nearest competitors. And what they found was that rapidly growing businesses had a loyal customer base, and that really was the big differentiator. So the next question became, well, what's the definition of a loyal customer? And so they sampled a number of different questions to see how well the answers correlated to loyal customer behavior. And the question that best correlated to loyalty was how likely are you to recommend? So now that brings us to the second facet of NPS, which is the metric and how you can measure your progress against the philosophy that you've embarked on. So the question is asked, how likely are you to recommend our business to a friend or a business associate? And the customer is offered a row of numbers from 0 to 10 with which to respond. And now you can see that we have a way to understand the customer base according to their loyalty level. So promoters are going to respond with a 9 or a 10. These are your raving fans. So this is like an unpaid marketing or sales team running around, feet on the street, helping your business grow. Detractors are the opposite. They're disappointed in their experience with you. They're talking negatively about you. And, as we all know, in the world of social media, detractors can be pretty powerful. So with those guys, it's important to reach out to them immediately, get them turned around, get any misunderstanding cleared up so that you prevent them from speaking negatively. And then finally, the passives are sort of the low-hanging fruit in the world of Net Promoter. They're not unhappy with you, but something's holding them back from recommending you highly. And with these guys, they're moderately satisfied. They're moderately happy, but they're not so happy that they're going to run around telling their friends to help you grow. So their business is vulnerable. And if a competitor comes in with better pricing or an interesting offer, you could lose them. So the score is going to be calculated as the percentage of promoters minus the percentage of detractors, and that's going to give you your measurement. Now, the reason that you're going to want to measure NPS and focus your business on creating more happy customers is because promoters exhibit behaviors that generate growth and retention. So they stay with you longer. And this speaks to John's point about the longer you can keep a customer, the more it builds, the retention builds, the more the financial benefits accrue. They're also less price sensitive. So these guys trust you now. They're willing to spend more money for additional products and services. And they're willing to tell their friends about you. So now we've got that nice organic growth happening because they're telling the world and singing your praises. And interesting, the last thing that they do that really helps helps you build your business is they provide feedback. And that's going to give you the information that you need to not only continue to delight them, but to delight others like them. Now, Net Promoter within franchise systems can have a lot of additional benefits. So Net Promoter is going to let you stack rank your franchisees so that you can observe the highest performing locations and glean best practices and share those across the network. And then conversely, you're going to have specific additional insight you might need to move poorly performing locations out of the network and onto their next opportunity. You can also use NPS in the franchise sales process to prove potential franchise candidates that your business model works, instill confidence in those guys and your brand. And then we've also seen franchise systems use NPS to provide evidence to potential investors of the same thing. This metric is the de facto standard for predicting growth and retention, and it's used by some of the largest, most prestigious brands on the planet. So in summary, you want a simple survey process. NPS, as you know, we're big fans of. It's a 2-question process. It's going to get you a lot of information. It's simple for your customers to understand. It's simple for your franchisees to understand. And it's easy for you to use as a metric across the brand. If you don't use NPS, you're definitely going to want a question that can be compared over time. So what happens as you start getting feedback is that you start getting insights and making operational improvements. So this isn't a one-and-done type of process. You're going to be improving, making gradual improvements and iterating over time. And so you want a question that can be appropriate as you move through that process. You're also going to want to use a question that generates a measurable outcome. So again, you need a metric. And again, NPS is perfect in that way as well. And then finally, I'm sure I don't need to explain this to this crowd. You're going to want to use the same question across the entire franchise network. Consistency is key so that the data that you gather is really actionable and can provide the most value. So John, you want to take us through another case study?
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thanks very much, Angela. So this is an actual case study. So let's start with looking at this question administered to current customers and see what we find. So here, in this case, the vast majority of the customers are the promoters. These are, the guys that you're looking for, who are the advocates of your business, who are going to make all these referrals, and these are the people who are giving you those 5-star reviews on Yelp. So the vast majority were promoters. There were a smaller number of passives and a few detractors. Now, of course, no one wants detractors, but on balance, this is actually a very strong profile. So we asked the same question of X customers. And here's what we found. So with the X customers, the lost customers, over half of them are detractors. That's a difference of 5x from what we saw with the customers. And so this question is, as Angela mentioned, it's incredibly predictive. And imagine if you had a time machine and had gathered this very information about this company's franchises or the customers before they left. So what would you do? Well, I'd imagine what you'd probably do is call them up and then ask them what the company did that didn't satisfy them, and then find a way to make it right. So by having this kind of feedback system in place, that's exactly what you're able to do. You can identify these detractors before they leave and then intervene. So, more likely than not, you'll see something about these detractors that you can learn about other customers as well. So maybe they share a poor technician. Maybe there was a specific problem product. Maybe it was, around a specific franchise. But this feedback is a great way to address these kind of broader problems that might have gone undetected otherwise. Okay, so next we're going to go into another poll. And what I wanted to do is we've covered so far measuring customer feedback. Now we want to talk about looking at measuring customer retention. And Adam, go ahead and pull up the poll. So measuring retention is a little bit different in that there's really no hard and fast rules about how to measure retention. So we can't tell you how, but we can illustrate how to think about measuring retention. And I wanted to start out with this poll, which, by the way, you can select one or more of these options. But so imagine that you're running a lawn care franchise and you want to measure retention. So each of the choices that we're describing below are, it's a different customer situation, and you might want to include them when you're measuring, franchise-wide retention. You might not. So the question is, when you look at these, which ones would you definitely want to measure and include in that retention rate, and which ones maybe not? And keep in mind as you're doing this that all customers aren't created equal, and measuring retention of everyone who's ever tried your product just might throw off your measurement a little bit. And so in full disclosure, this is not an easy question, and there are no specific right or wrong answers. And that's why we wanted to ask it and have you think through this. Adam, do we have results? Okay, let's take a look at this. So, requested a single lawn service and then never again used your service. And most of you wouldn't count that as a customer. And that really makes a lot of sense because the business model for most lawn services is steady repeat customers. So at some point you have to say, this person has used us 3 times, so yeah, they're really a customer. They've used us twice or they've used us once. I'm not going to count them as a customer. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Came in on a Groupon and didn't continue. So Groupon is very, very well known to produce people who are price shoppers, who have very low loyalty, who, frankly, give you bad reviews on social media and who aren't going to continue afterwards. And so what most of you are suggesting by not including them makes perfect sense, because if one franchise, for example, has a very heavy up Groupon strategy and another doesn't at all, you're going to see differences in retention rate that's just driven by their promotional strategy. Okay, someone who used the service twice and then canceled, I would agree in most cases you would probably want to measure those folks. And then I think the last one, I probably didn't describe that one quite right, but what I had intended to communicate was, let's say someone used the service for the whole summer and then they canceled. In that case, I think most of you would want to measure that. So that's perfect. Thanks for all of that, and I think we can jump right back. Okay. Great. So let's go back one slide. Right, so we're not going to do a poll for this one, but I just wanted to take you through another example, which just illustrates that this is not necessarily a straightforward process. So just about everyone would look at franchise retention rate at the franchise system overall. And then I think most of you, and Angela had mentioned this, would really want to look at whether it's retention rate or NPS at a individual franchise level. But what about the individual lawn care specialist? Would you want to start measuring retention that way? Well, you might or might not. So let's say they only have a handful of clients. Then the numbers that you might get for any individual might be too small to make any kind of meaningful comparison. And so for this, you'd have to use your judgment or consult a statistics expert. So the point of all these questions about measuring retention is that it's really not as simple as you might think at first glance. And regardless of how you decide to measure retention, it's critical that you start by defining what you consider a customer and do so in a consistent way, measuring at the lowest actionable level, but not such a small level that you don't have enough data to be statistically reliable. And then, making sure the measurement is done at a crucial point in the customer lifestyle. And of course, all the information needs to be communicated as quickly as possible, because the more time you have to use the information, the more impact it's going to have on your business. Okay, so far we've covered measuring customer feedback, measuring customer retention. Now let's dive into creating a customer feedback loop. So let's use an experience that we all may have had to illustrate the customer feedback loop. And I'm going to default to coffee, which is my favorite beverage. So let's say it's early in the morning, and you walk into your local Starbucks and you order a coffee, and the barista looks up at you somberly and says, "Oh, I'm sorry, it's going to take a few minutes to brew. We don't have one right now." So you look at your watch because you're running late for a meeting. So at that point, you have clearly experienced a problem. But let's say that the savvy barista notices that you're in a hurry. They've been trained to pay very keen attention to their customers. So now the company has noticed. And then next, it comes to resolution. So to your surprise, your server looks up at you and smiles and said, you know what? It's on me today. The coffee is free. The problem is resolved. So you, the customer, changed from possibly mildly annoyed to surprised and delighted. I had this exact experience happen to me a week ago when a friend of mine, there was something wrong with his order. But the barista came over, handed him a $4 gift certificate, said, sir, next one's on us. And you could see the look on his face. It was really visceral. It was really an emotional impact that this had. So this is an example of a great feedback loop at a company that's known to be very keenly focused on customer experiences. So let's break each of these down. And to do that, I'd like to bring Angela in to lead us through the framework. And we're going to start first with the problem experience. Angela.
Perfect. So let's talk about the importance of having a feedback loop with your customers. Everybody knows they can't run a perfect business and they can't make every customer happy at every moment. But if you have processes in place to understand how customers are feeling and how to get them turned around, then you've got a much better chance of retaining your loyalty. So where are you going to capture the customer's experience? As John has described, sometimes it happens in the moment. Sometimes you get that immediate feedback. Sometimes a customer will call a call center or email support, and sometimes they'll just walk out the door and go straight to social media. So it's important to address these moments as soon as you can, the minute they come in. And this is especially true for online reviews. Those things are in the public eye, and the public needs to see you responding appropriately. So I'm betting that most of you have processes in place for the other situations, but with online reviews, a lot of times franchise systems want some coaching. So with positive online reviews, it's always a good idea to encourage franchisees to comment on them and express appreciation, because even though the review was positive and maybe less urgent from a business standpoint, it says something to the happy customer when you've acknowledged what they've done for you and that you appreciate the gesture. So always a great idea to respond to those reviews. Now, if a franchisee gets a negative online review, though, the best thing to do is encourage them to take the conversation offline. You should let them know never to get into a battle with a customer online. It will invariably reflect badly on the business. But take the conversation offline and ask the customer to change their rating when the issue is resolved. So just a couple of ideas there for when you get that immediate feedback. Now, we've also talked about Net Promoter feedback requests, and those can be triggered immediately after a transaction with a customer, and then periodically at important points along the customer journey. Or having an NPS system can also allow you to just create some standard process and guidelines for following up with your customers. So that's going to allow more of that practice, steady follow-up. Some Net Promoter systems even allow you to set up automated text alerts. So when a detractor comment comes in, the manager or the employee of the franchise is going to get notified immediately, and then they can follow up within a certain window that's recommended by the brand. We actually have one customer that's an automotive service brand that requires their shop managers to have automated text alerts turned on, and this brand requires that the management team follow up with unhappy customers within 10 minutes. So that's pretty amazing, and it may not be possible for your brand, but it is a great way to communicate that you care about the customer's experience and that you want to make things right. And then finally, you'll want to pay attention to that quieter feedback that may not be detectable until sometime later, where customers just don't come back. Sometimes unhappy customers are just going to vote with their feet. And I think we've all had this experience, dining in a restaurant and maybe the food was terrible or maybe the service was terrible. And the waiter comes over and says, "How was everything?" And we say, "Oh, it was fine." And then we just don't go back. And that type of feedback you're going to uncover with your retention metrics. When customers vote with their feet closing the loop in that case may look like a win-back strategy. So it's always best to have processes in place to detect that you're having issues before you start seeing disappointing numbers on your financials. But this type of closed loop process is going to help you engage customers in conversations that can improve your relationship and increase the odds that they're going to stay loyal to the brand. But the most important thing in the whole process is going to be to make sure that your customers have a way to talk to you when they're not happy, so they're not frustrated and going out to social media. So we've talked a little bit about how you'll respond. Let's say a few other things about that. Speed is always going to be important. You know, just like our automotive brand, you're going to want to set guidelines for your brand about how quickly you expect follow-up to happen. And, you know, keep in mind that the faster you follow up, the better impression you're going to make with your customers. And then when you get the customer on the phone, it's important to make sure you're listening. And that sounds like a no-brainer, but you'll be surprised at the number of people who get on the phone and they're defensive or they're argumentative and they can't listen to the details that the customer is trying to share. So always listen. Sometimes you're going to have to offer a concession to get somebody turned around, and sometimes the customer is going to be satisfied just from having heard from you. They like to be heard, so you won't know which response is the right one until you sort of patiently hear the customer out. And then finally, make sure that your frontline staff know what they're authorized to do to make things right for the customer. So in John's example with the Starbucks coffee, the barista knew that it was okay for them to, if they see a customer getting agitated, to comp the coffee. So you may have specific examples in your own brand of things that may typically go wrong, and you're going to want to make sure the frontline staff knows what they can and cannot do. You don't want to put the customer through another phone call. You don't want to give them another hoop to jump through. You really want to empower your people to make good on your brand promise in the moment. And then once you've gotten your feedback loop in place, iterate. So this becomes that very important final facet in the Net Promoter process, and that is the methodology. So gather your feedback, follow up with your customers, make necessary operational improvements, and track your success metrics, track your NPS, track your retention, track your other KPIs, and learn from your mistakes. And the most important thing is to just begin where you are and let the process evolve until you're seeing that Net Promoter Score rise and your retention numbers sort of steadily increasing. So in summary, track your feedback. That's going to be at your macro level, your periodic level, your immediate feedback level. All of those points are going to be critically important to keeping your customers delighted. And then create that ongoing, automatic, replicable feedback loop. Make sure your team and your whole franchise system understand the expectations around follow-up. Make it as fast as you can. And make sure that they know how to handle those moments of truth. When the customer's upset, they want to be empowered to make your brand look like a rock star when it comes to customer success. And then, you know, basically wash, rinse, and repeat, guys. Just keep tracking, keep learning, and keep making those operational improvements.
All right. Well, fantastic, Angela. Thanks very much. So Angela walked us through the customer feedback loop. We also looked at checklists for customer retention and then customer feedback itself. So now what I'd like to do is think about how we might want to think about customers tactically and strategically. So let's start out first with tactical thinking. So what tactical thinking is, it involves solving problems in the here and now. So the Starbucks case that we've been talking about, this is a great example of tactical thinking. The barista sees a problem and makes good on it almost immediately. On the other hand, strategic thinking involves looking at the root cause of that problem and then solving it systematically. So again, with the Starbucks example, very early on, the company identified lots of overall problems that could potentially happen in the cafes, like whether it's the coffee not being ready or someone made the wrong drink or what have you. But they also realized there was just no possible way they can anticipate all of the scenarios that might happen. So what they did is to make a strategic decision that said, okay, we're going to give baristas very wide latitude in offering make goods for any kind of problem that might happen. So in one fell swoop, what they did is solved a whole wide range of problems before they ever happened. So this is a strategic fix. It was deciding to empower the baristas to offer them make goods, and the tactical effort in this case was the actual offering of a free beverage. So over time, these kinds of strategic initiatives are the things that have the potential to bring really transformative change for your company, and that's going to lead to higher retention and higher long-term growth. Okay, so when you're focusing your initial efforts, you're going to get the most immediate impact by focusing on these kind of tactical issues. So you need to start by finding a way to measure customer feedback. You need to measure retention that results from that feedback. And then you have to create this feedback loop so that you're taking action on those great learnings. And then once you learn what's working and what's not, revise your systems like Starbucks did to try to eliminate the root cause of as many different types of problems as you can. So let's close today's discussion with a few thoughts on how all of this can bring value to your business. So you might ask, what are the value of simple checklists? So let me give you a quick example. So in the medical world, there's a dirty little secret about hospitals. So you might think that if you go into a hospital, it's among the cleanest, most sterile places you could ever go, and you would not be at risk at all of catching an infection at the hospital. But unfortunately, nothing could be further from the truth. So according to the CDC, every year about 700,000 people develop infections at a hospital, not before hospital, but they develop them at the hospital. And of that, 75,000 people die. So people die just from infections they got inside a hospital. So this is really a major health hazard, and it should be completely preventable. So what is the solution? Well, what Johns Hopkins did is run a study with, say, 3 different approaches. And what they found was that the winning approach to address this problem was a very simple checklist. And that checklist was focused on washing hands. It turns out that busy physicians running their rounds didn't wash their hands between patients. And once that changed, it dramatically decreased the infection rate. So in our experience, retention is similar in that it's a major problem that's largely preventable. And using checklists, you'll be well on your way to unlocking the growth of your franchise. But as we mentioned earlier, beyond growth, there are even more benefits to focusing on retention. So let's talk about a few of those. First is if you ask your customers for feedback, as Angela has outlined, what you're going to get is improvement suggestions, of course, but you'll also get ideas for new products and new services, particularly from the folks who are the enthusiasts to your brand. So what you're going to have is a great pipeline for new ideas that can become profitable products. So this is benefit beyond retention number 1, a pipeline for new product and service ideas. So secondly, studies show that the more empowered employees feel, the less your turnover is going to be. And so by empowering your employees, what you're going to do is reduce your turnover, which is going to reduce your recruiting and training costs, which will have a direct and immediate impact to your bottom line. So this is benefit beyond retention number 2, is that the reduced turnover and its immediate impact is going to grow your profitability. And then finally, by focusing on retention, as Angela mentioned, you're going to have more 9s and 10s, these raving fan promoters. And what these guys are going to do is write more Yelp reviews and more social media mentions. And that, like referrals, are going to directly drive your top line revenues. So benefit number 3 is that more great reviews are going to drive more customers. And this concludes the formal presentation. On behalf of Angela and myself, I'd like to thank everyone for participating, and we'll open up the board now for discussion.
Perfect. Yes, we've had some great questions come in from our audience, and so I will just kind of start going through these. So first we have a question of how do businesses respond to customers who might be happy, but they are categorized as a detractor because they don't like to give recommendations? This person in the audience says that they're seeing customers who, when they're followed up with, say that they're happy, but they responded to their NPS question with a 2 because they don't give recommendations.
Yeah, so I'll take that one. The Net Promoter question says, how likely are you to recommend our business to a friend or a business associate? And sometimes you will have a customer who takes that question very literally, and they'll say, I don't know anybody to recommend you to. And so in that case, just ignore it. The Net Promoter data is really just going to be an internal way of gathering information for you. It's just data. And, that's nothing to worry about. If you're really focusing on your score and you really want your franchise system focusing on the score, you can talk to the detractor and say, hey, we're really focused on understanding your satisfaction level as well as your likelihood to recommend, and sort of reframe it for them so that they can answer again. And with most Net Promoter systems, you're going to have a way to ask the question again, resend the survey.
Okay, great. Thank you, Angela. John, was there anything you wanted to add on that?
No, that's perfect.
Okay, wonderful. Well, and I think this next one could be one for you, John, to address. An audience member is looking for just some advice on winning back a lost customer. What would be some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of different ways to think about that. Let me offer a few ideas. So the first is there's an idea called red carpet in, red carpet out. And so I think the idea of red carpet in makes perfect sense for onboarding customers and all the great things you want to do to make them feel welcome. But what do you do on the way out? On the way out, if you offer them the red carpet, tell them how valued they are, tell them that you want to have them back, that's going to grease the skids so that when you do go back at them, you're going to have a higher likelihood of getting them back. Second, you want to identify why customers are leaving. And so if you start asking people, you're going to come to 5, 6, 7 typical reasons, and you want to start storing that in your CRM. On an immediate basis, once you've identified these different issues, you can start to brainstorm or create like a menu of responses that an agent or a manager, whoever, can use to offer an immediate fix. And they have to be given a budget. And this is really no different from what Starbucks did. They recognized that there were all sorts of problems that were going to come up, and rather than mandate what the solution was, they just said, okay, do what you need. But however you do it, you want to come up with some specific ideas how you might offer make goods to the customer or offer ways to entice them to stay. And then finally, if you start tracking why customers are leaving, then what you can do is just wait a year and then send an email campaign and include the ex-customers in that campaign, and then have your pitch really focused on the reason that they left.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's some great advice. Next, let's see. I think, Angela, this would be a question for you. This person is wondering, would you advise removing scores that were obvious errors, such as a positive comment that was aligned with a very low score?
Yeah, if it's very obvious, I would act on that. Sometimes somebody could just hit the wrong button, and if that's clear in the feedback that they offered, there wouldn't be any reason not to make that right.
Okay, great. And then kind of just another question for you, Angela, is how many promoters does it take to nullify a detractor in your view? Or is that something that you can quantify?
Well, I can sort of say a little bit more about the scoring. So if you notice on that graphic where we displayed the breakdown of the scores, so detractors are 0 to 6, passives are 7 or an 8, and promoters are 9s and 10s. So the way the score is calculated, it's a percentage of the promoters minus the percentage of detractors, and clearly detractors are weighted much more heavily. And that was done when this metric was developed by Bain. They weighted the detractors more heavily because they wanted to take into consideration that natural human behavior to complain more when you're disappointed with a company. So there's not an exact answer to the question as it's asked, but it is true that detractors are going to be more impactful on your score. Now, passives aren't even going to be taken into consideration, and it's interesting to look at because passives aren't going to help you grow and they're not going to hurt you. So they're sort of very neutral in the scoring itself. And as a matter of fact, if all of your customers responded with an 8, they'd be fairly satisfied, but they're not loyal enough to help you grow. So the way the calculation works, the promoters minus the percentage of detractors, your net promoter score would be 0, which means your customer base is not going to help you grow. So to this question, back in the research study, the number they determined that promoters would tell 1 to 2 people, detractors would tell 6 to 10. And that was back in the 90s before the advent of social media. So with social media, you know that a detractor can reach thousands of people with one tweet. So it's even more important now to really focus on the fact that those detractors can have a big impact on your business and really focus on delighting them, addressing their concerns when you do get their feedback and getting them turned around.
Fantastic. Thank you for addressing that. And we've got some immediate feedback already for you, Angela, and for Listen 360. Rob says that he loves what you're doing at Listen 360. Today, the buyer has more information and power than ever, and so we need to be listening. And then he added a question on, with communication being faster than ever, can we use real-time tools like live chat and chat bots to get even more accurate NPS responses? What are your kind of thoughts on using those as tools?
You know, I'm not aware of a company that offers that, but I know that there are some website tools that do offer the ability to chat and interact with customers immediately. And I would say that, yes, you know, you want to be engaged. I tell everybody, you know, you're in the relationship business. You have the service that you offer or the product that you offer, but primarily you're in the relationship business. So the more you can engage with your customers and strengthen that relationship, meeting them where they are, the better off your business will be.
Very true. Fantastic. And I'm still going through some questions here. So next we have a question. What is a typical frequency for sending surveys before a customer becomes irritated by them?
Yeah, that's you got to strike a delicate balance there. We work with about 240 franchise systems, and for the ones who have long-term relationships with their customers, I would say 98% of them invite feedback quarterly, and that seems to be a nice amount of time to gather enough feedback for your business and not push the customer into survey fatigue. Survey fatigue is a real thing. So some people think, oh my gosh, I want as much feedback as I can get, so I'm just going to ask them every month. And we always caution people about that because, you know, you will wear them out and they will stop responding. So it's sort of a self-defeating thing. But quarterly or even every 6 months, the ones that don't ask quarterly ask every 6 months. So a small percentage spread it out that much.
Okay, great. Thank you. And let's see, I have a question here, and this is one I think will be particularly interesting for our audience of people in the franchise industry, is what are some different ways that brands can put their net promoter scores to use? You know, for example, maybe using them some way as a franchisee recruitment tool and not just as a, you know, customer retention tool.
Yeah, definitely in the franchise sales process. You know, when you're selling, you want to really convince that franchise candidate that you have a solid business model, that the plan that you put in place for them will be successful, and your net promoter score is going to say a lot about that, and it will instill confidence. You know, potential investors. So when you go for funding, more and more financial partners are interested in understanding your net promoter score. Now, in addition to that, you're going to want to take the reviews and put them out on your website. So, especially when you've got a ton of positive feedback, you want to take those out there, put them on your website. Some companies, and Listen 360 is one, are able to send the feedback to Google so that we can generate stars in your AdWords campaigns, and we can greatly increase the efficiency of those campaigns. And tie the feedback to your Facebook pages would be another great thing to do. Most Net Promoter Systems are also looking at leveraging the promoters to drive reviews on review sites that are important for your business. So Google and Better Business Bureau and Facebook and some of the others that are specific by industry. You can definitely leverage your promoters. They've said they'd be happy to recommend you, and so we want to put that process on steroids and get them out into the public eyes as well as we can to really improve online reputation.
Yeah, certainly.
I
Sorry,
just
go
had one
ahead,
thing
John.
there, and answer to Angela's point. It's so if you have a system like this implemented across the franchise system as a whole, for a franchisor, it's a huge advantage when you're recruiting new franchisees, because what you can tell them is, not everyone's going to succeed, right? But what they're going to have from day one is this built-in feedback. So if there's something going wrong with their business, whether it's the service people or the product isn't delivered quite right, they're going to know that, and they're going to know that from day one. So from that perspective, it really is tremendously helpful for the franchisees and for the franchisor as well, just to help make sure folks get off on the right foot.
Absolutely. And John, actually, this next one, this would be, I think, a great one for us to get your perspective on. What would be your thoughts on the effectiveness of, implementing loyalty programs and loyalty apps? Is that enough for customer retention?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I would just grab your phone right now and take a look on that and see if you have any loyalty programs that maybe you downloaded it and you got that free whatever, and then you never used it again. And in fact, the vast majority of apps like that go unused. In general, I mean, the whole idea of a loyalty program, that warrants a completely separate webinar. And of course, those are extremely important, and you need to make sure to get it right. But the vast majority of these are really, they make an economic argument. So, for Starbucks, okay, you come here X number of times and you get a free drink. So it's really a volume discount that's trying to lock you in. And typically, it's not going to do anything to make you think better of the company. It's not going to build up equity. All these efforts for creating a retention program do the latter. What they try to do is to get you to make the experience better, so that you're going to get more promoters and you're going to get more people who are loyal. And among other things, your loyal customers are going to be the ones who are most resistant to a price increase. So the two programs, they do need to happen, but having the loyalty program alone definitely will not be something you can count on to address your customer retention problems.
Okay. I had a feeling that might be along the lines of your answer. So thank you for that.
Sure.
Let's see. I think this is a great one to address. What is the difference between satisfaction and loyalty? How do those kind of play off of each other? Angela, maybe that is one for you.
Okay, yeah. So customer satisfaction is going to contribute to loyalty, but if you're using a satisfaction question, you're really asking about something that's happened in the past. And so you're kind of looking in the rearview mirror there. With Net Promoter, you're asking about the behavior that your customer is going to take in the future. And so that metric is going to be predictive. So while satisfaction is going to contribute, loyalty is a very different thing. And if we go back to the example about the restaurant, you may have a restaurant that you just love and you visit, every couple of weeks you're there, and usually you get a great experience, but you go in one night and it's packed, and maybe they're shorthanded, and the service is really slow. But when asked about that restaurant, you're still going to recommend them. So you've got a long relationship, and in general, you're still going to use them. You're still going to talk positively about them, And so you're going to give them a hall pass on the one night that they really disappointed you. That's the difference between loyalty and satisfaction. So if we had asked the question about that most recent visit and got a negative experience, we wouldn't know how that was going to manifest in the future. Loyalty is going to tell you that, and that's why Net Promoter can be so valuable as a predictive measure. Did you have anything you'd add to that, John?
So the only thing I was thinking is that in some recent customer interviews I did, we asked people why they left a company, and more than one of them would say, well, yeah, I was totally satisfied. So I would say, well, why did you leave? They said, yeah, well, a competitor came by and they offered the same service for a couple dollars less. So you can be satisfied, but that doesn't necessarily imply as a customer that you're going to stick around with the company. So this idea of satisfaction and loyalty really are very different elements. And I think that the Net Promoter Score does a great job distinguishing between the two of those.
Fantastic. And I know we've reached the 2 o'clock mark. I have one last question that I think would be great to end on, and really great for our franchise audience. How should a franchisor coach franchisees on following up with detractors? What are some steps that generate some best outcomes?
Yeah, so with detractors, the most important thing is to reach out. First of all, reach out and then listen. It's really important that whoever calls really understands all the aspects of what went down. The next thing I would recommend is that you not feel like you have to solve the problem immediately while you're on the phone. Sometimes it's enough to really acknowledge the person, tell them that you need to give this some thought, give it some consideration, and you'll get back to them. So if it's a tough problem that you can't solve immediately, give yourself permission to ask for some time and get back to them. Now, obviously, if you can solve the problem, it's great to go ahead and do that. And most franchise systems know the types of problems that typically occur, and it's good to have some processes in place so that your frontline team, again, knows exactly how to improve the customer's experience right in the moment. But those are the main things. Really have somebody do it who can listen and can be empathetic and give themselves the leeway to resolve the problem really effectively.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add on that is that you have to make sure to capture these guys in the first place. I think what you'll find is a lot of organizations simply don't know when people are upset, and of course, then they can't do anything about it. So getting that information, absolutely critical. And to Angelo's point, you don't need to necessarily action on it right away, but to the extent that you can start to empower the more frontline folks to take action, that's going to be more powerful for your organization overall.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for sharing your insight and expertise today. And thank you to our audience for sharing some really great questions. I know there were some that we couldn't get to in this time that we have today. And so we will be sharing those with our presenters, with John and Angela, so that we can get more specific answers for all of you. So I want to say thank you to everyone again, and we will have the slides and the presentation available following the conclusion of today's webinar. So we'll share that information with all of our attendees in the audience today. So thank you again, John and Angela. It was a pleasure to have you.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.